The entire history of the Roman Empire. In a valley that smelled of laurel and damp stone, the hills around Alba Longa breathed like sleeping beasts. Shepherds moved like patient stars across the slopes, and wind slid through the grasses with a sound like memory. Here, before Rome was Rome, a thread of destiny wound through quiet villages and cradled a promise no one could yet name. Old women told stories by firelight, of kings with silver tongues and gods who walked in sandals made of thunderclouds. Children drowsed, wide-eyed, at tales of a future city whose walls would catch the dawn and whose roads would run like veins to every horizon. The night wrapped them gently, and the whisper in the grass said only this: soon. On the banks of the Tiber, a basket drifted like a forgotten prayer. Inside, two infants listened to the lap of water, their cries thin as moth wings. A she-wolf, drawn by hunger or mercy, nosed the wicker rim and found a different hunger satisfied, one for kin, for guardianship, for the miracle of life set adrift. They grew on milk and moonlight, learning the vocabulary of the wild, the snap of twig, the scent of rain, the law that strength must cradle the weak. When men found them, they carried the boys to a rougher grammar, huts, boundaries, and the arguments of kings. In time, one brother named a city, and that name was Rome, the other became a sigh on the wind. And though sorrow brushed the moment, the new city lifted its face to the sun. New walls rose from the earth like teeth, and young men beat their chests with the thunder of beginnings. But a city is not merely spears and songs, it needs families, laughter, and the weaving of futures. So Rome reached, awkwardly and boldly, to the Sabines, first with rashness, then with prayers for peace. It was the Sabine women, hearts stitched to two worlds, who stepped between blades and said, "Enough." Their words were softer than steel and stronger for it. The air cooled. Hands that had clenched around spears found each other instead, and the first stones of Rome's character, fierce, fallible, yet capable of mercy, settled into place. A line of kings followed, each leaving a thumbprint on the wet clay of the city. Numa taught Rome to measure time with festivals and quiet reverence. Tullus taught it how to harden into muscle when neighbors grew stern. Ancus built bridges and saltworks, tying commerce to the river's heartbeat. Later came Etruscan grandeur, arches and augury, purple hems and the hummingbird flicker of power. Rome learned to admire and to imitate, to borrow as cleverly as it battled. But the last king's shadow grew long and cold, and within that chill, the citizens learned another lesson: how to say no. The night the city turned against its king, torches bobbed like small stars, and indignation moved from street to street like a tide. A wrong had been done that neither gold nor gloss could smother. In the square, voices rose, first in stammers, then in sentences, then in a chorus. Rome took its breath and, for the first time, chose itself. Dawn arrived with a new silhouette, consuls instead of crowns, vows instead of decrees. It was a fragile dawn, as all dawns are, but people stepped into it with careful feet and steady eyes. They did not yet know the weight of liberty, they only knew its taste, bright as pomegranate on the tongue. The Republic was a contraption of balances, pulleys of law, and counterweights of custom. It creaked and sang, it frustrated and protected. Senators argued like weather systems, and magistrates learned to wear authority lightly enough to be removed from it. In the forum, citizens practiced the art of becoming a people. They learned to line their pockets with patience and their tongues with persuasion. Rome's heart beat not only in the drum of rallying troops but in the rustle of parchment, the rise and fall of debate, the idea that no single man should own the sky. Yet liberty has strata, and beneath the marble language of law, many feet still stood on muddy ground. Plebeians, farmers, craftsmen, soldiers who bled as red as any patrician, asked not for favors but for fairness. Their voices gathered like a storm on a far ridge. Strikes and secessions followed, not to shatter Rome but to reshape it. Tribunes arose like lighthouses, promising to turn back storms by the light of a single word, veto. Slowly, stubbornly, a broader citizenship was hammered on the anvil of protest, and the city learned that strength is a braid, not a single strand. When law is only in the lips of the learned, it drifts like mist; when written, it stands like an oak. The 12 tables were nailed to memory and marketplace alike, so any passerby could read the bones of Rome's justice. It was rough law, sometimes harsh, sometimes simple, but it was visible, and that mattered. Parents traced the letters for their children, advocates argued with calloused fingers. The city, newly literate in its own promises, began to hold itself accountable by daylight. The stories by the firelight were fine, but here, in the square, Rome spoke plainly: this is who we are, and this is how we'll be. No city sleeps alone for long. Around Rome, other towns stirred, measuring their own ambitions against the newcomers' rising walls. Sometimes the meetings were dances, sometimes they were duels. Treaties braided together with sword belts, and alliances were as seasonal as rain. In victory, Rome learned restraint; in defeat, it learned humility and the craft of return. Roads began to stitch hills and valleys together, and between way stations, the idea of Rome traveled faster than any single soldier could march. Neighbor by neighbor, the horizon inched outward. They stood across the Tiber like a mirror that glared back, wealthy, walled, and proud. Year after year, Rome camped before its gates, wintering in trenches, summering in dust, learning the patience of stone. Children grew into men beneath those ramparts, dreams turned to duties as the seasons wheeled. At last the earth itself yielded a path, tunnels whispered under the city, a secret river of determination. When they fell, it fell not to fury but to persistence, the quiet, grinding oath that Rome would not look away. The spoils returned to Rome as trophies, yes, but also as teachers. Rome had learned that endurance could be sharper than any spear. They came like a northern wind, rough with iron and the smell of wet leather. The Gauls were laughter and lightning, sudden as summer storms, and Rome, still young in its pride, met them on an unlucky field by the river Allia. Shields slipped, lines bent, and before the sun had climbed to noon, the city's doors stood naked to the stranger's knock. Fire licked the thatch. Statues cracked in the heat like dry bones. Yet on the capital's high rock, a handful held fast, hunger gnawing their bellies as stubbornly as hope bit the dark. One night, the sacred geese honked against a thief's footfall, and steel flashed where sleep would have been. Down below, ashes drifted in alleys like grey snow, but on the rock, Rome remembered its spine. Morning found the city smeared with soot and silence. Men carried their past in baskets, piece by piece, from blackened doorways to new foundations. The streets were laid without the old compass, crooked with haste, as if Rome could outrun its memory by changing its map. But the hum of hammers and the rhythm of carts were lullabies for courage. Rome rebuilt, not only with stone, but with vows. Never again to be surprised, never again to leave walls to chance. They trained, drilled, counted, and measured. In the Forum, a new patience settled, laws to strengthen the army, granaries to calm panic, rituals to remind the city that even gods admire a people who rise after falling. To the south, in the high-boned Apennines, the Samnites waited with mountain eyes, sharp, quiet, unblinking. Rome marched into those hills believing that the world was a flat plain awaiting discipline. The mountains smirked and taught otherwise. At the Caudine Forks, Roman legions walked beneath Samnite spears, stripped of pride but not of breath. Humiliation is a hard tutor, but a thorough one. Rome learned to bend the maniples like reeds in water, to carry engineers alongside eagles, to tame terrain rather than merely curse it. When the legions returned to those mountains, they moved with the memory of the forked pass in their bones, and the Samnites, fierce as ever, felt a new steadiness in Rome's step. The Appian Way stretched from the city like a polished thought, straight, certain, enduring. Stones fitted so snugly that hooves sang on them. Along its length, milestones counted distance while standards counted victories. Forts dotted the line like beads, markets thickened at the edges with figs, armor, and gossip. Roads were more than paths for soldiers. They were arteries where ideas traveled in sandals, Latin words, Roman contracts, the habit of weighing things on scales rather than swords. Every mile widened the meaning of citizen. Along with roads went aqueducts, arched as rainbows that refused to leave. Along with aqueducts went trust, that water, like law, would arrive. From across the Ionian Sea came Pyrrhus, a prince carved like a coin, bringing elephants, walking hills with tusks, and the old Greek science of battle. He won, and won again, victories so costly they tasted like defeat. Roman dead lay thick as corn after harvest, but the survivors rose, harvesters themselves now, cutting grief into purpose. Pyrrhus asked what sort of men these were who would not stay beaten. Rome answered without poetry, levies raised again, roads flying again, mothers tying greaves again. In time, the prince sailed home with his bright tactics and dim results, and Italy, as if exhaling after a long climb, found Rome standing at the summit. The sea had been Carthage's mirror, blue, confident, infinite, while Rome had been a land creature, hooved and hoof-bound. But hunger teaches new tricks. Watching a grounded Carthaginian ship, Roman carpenters took its measure like tailors, sewing together a navy plank by plank. They added the corvus, an iron beak that turned waves into streets and sailors into infantry. Battles rolled across the foam, ships grappling like stags, boarding ramps slamming down like bridges thrown at the sky. Storms tore fleets to tatters, and still Rome rebuilt. At last, near the A-gates, the great gamble paid, sails cracked, rams struck, and Carthage's empire of spray surrendered a chunk of itself to a people who had only lately learned to float. Carthage licked its wounds and sent Hamilcar Barca west, a panther pacing into Spain's red earth. Silver gleamed in the hills, new cities rose like chess pieces. Young Hannibal watched his father draw maps with a general's finger and hatred with a father's voice. Never be a friend to Rome, the shadow whispered, and the boy nodded as if accepting a crown. Spain became a forge, hammering soldiers and coin, alliances and ambition. Carthaginian banners flickered where Iberian fires had long burned, and the sea between Africa and Europe narrowed to a handshake neither side would offer. In taverns from Gardus to Saguntum, men spoke a new name with a mixture of awe and appetite, Hannibal. When autumn bit the leaves to gold, Hannibal stepped north with elephants, cavalry, and the sort of oath that can stain a century. The Alps rose like petrified surf, each ridge a white roar. Men slipped, hooves scrabbled, snow cut the lungs. Rock slides spoke in thunder. And yet, after days that felt like years, the army descended into Italy like a storm arriving on schedule. The peninsula shivered. Here was a general who made geography obey. Towns watched their weather vanes swing toward him. Rome, cautious and stubborn, gathered legions and counsel, only to find that this newcomer played a game quicker and crueler than any they had rehearsed. A frost crept not over fields but across the back of the Senate's neck. On a hot day near Cannae, dust rose like incense and prayers clung to lips that would soon taste grit. Hannibal set his troops like a bow, thin in the center, steel at the ends. Rome pressed forward with the weight of certainty, and then felt the bowstring snap. The Carthaginian wings curled around them, the circle closed like a fist. The killing lasted as long as a nightmare and longer. When evening came, the field was a red sea with no shore. Yet even in that ruin, Rome refused to drown. Fabius, patient as a clock, counseled shadows and small bites. The city listened. Gates, stage, shut, armies shadowed Hannibal's marches, and the great wolf learned to snarl from cliffs it would not leap. From the quiet corridors of grief stepped a young commander with eyes like lit coals, Publius Cornelius Scipio. He crossed to Spain, where Hamilcar's legacy still smoldered, and doused it with cunning and speed. Soldiers loved him the way men love the morning after a long storm, not for spectacle, but for relief that feels like joy. Then to Africa he voyaged, forcing Carthage to call its lion home. On the plains near Zama, elephants charged, and Roman horns opened lanes like courteous doorkeepers. Hannibal, grey with wisdom, met Scipio, bright with it, tactics coiled and struck. When the dust settled, Carthage bent but did not break, yet Rome stood taller than any day before. In the hush after victory, the city felt a new weight settle on its shoulders, not fear now, but responsibility, as if the world had quietly handed over a key. The treaty ink was scarcely dry when suspicion began to itch again. Carthage rebuilt its warehouses, its sails, its pride. Rome watched. Cato, old and sharp as winter wind, ended every speech with the same refrain: Carthage must be destroyed. When at last legions landed on African sand, the end was measured in fire. Streets became furnaces, walls melted into memory. 3 years of siege ended with silence so heavy that even the sea seemed to hush. In that silence, Rome felt the loneliness of victory. Across the Adriatic, kings in gilded armor played their own games of empire. Macedonia, once the cradle of Alexander's thunder, now kicked against Roman envoys. Rome entered Greece not as a conqueror, it claimed, but as a liberator. Yet liberation is a habit easily mistaken for ownership. Battles at Cynocephaly and Pydna broke the phalanx's pride, the age of sarissas ended under the march of maniples. In amphitheaters and temples, the Romans bowed to Greek art even as they bound its masters. Conquest, it seemed, could wear admiration's mask. Philosophers came to Rome like migratory birds, carrying scrolls and questions. Stoics lectured senators, sculptors taught marble how to breathe. The conquerors became students, and their city began to glow with borrowed genius. Yet learning carried whispers of softness. Old farmers muttered that Latin virtue was trading its calluses for conversation. Still, libraries grew, mosaics brightened floors, and in twilight courtyards the gods of Olympus found new altars under Roman names. Eastward lay a treasure chest of perfumed air and jeweled ports. Pergamon willed itself to Rome, and the Republic discovered how heavy gold could be. Governors sailed out lean and returned round with luxury, silver mines sang louder than Senate oaths. Commerce filled the arteries of empire, but corruption crept in its wake. Rome's farmers watched cheap grain flood from provinces they had never seen. Wealth widened the world and the space between classes both. The streets blazed with laurel wreaths and trumpets when generals paraded home, elephants swaying, captives in chains, incense drifting through alleys. Children climbed statues to glimpse the heroes, poets wrote until their ink ran thin. But behind the applause grew unease. Veterans found their fields sold, their sweat forgotten. The forum buzzed not only with cheers but with questions: who owned the Republic now, the people, or the men who brought its spoils? 2 brothers stepped forward, idealism shining like dawn on their brows. Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus spoke of land for soldiers, bread for the hungry, limits to greed. The poor called them tribunes, the rich called them trouble. Reform met resistance, resistance met fury, and stones flew where arguments failed. The brothers fell, one after another, and Rome learned that its forum could become a battlefield without armies. Hope, however, does not stay buried, it lingers like a seed under ash. After the Gracchi, blood became familiar to marble. Factions sharpened words into knives, elections tasted of vengeance. Senators hired gangs as others hired rhetoric. Yet amid the chaos, the Republic kept walking, half blind, half brave, pretending that business continued as usual. Statues still gleamed, laws were still drafted, but beneath the sandals, the ground trembled. Gaius Marius rose from modest dust to command legions like a storm given human shape. He opened Rome's army to every citizen, rich or poor, and loyalty shifted from senate to sword. Victories in Africa and over the Teutonies filled the streets with cheers, but quietly, the Republic had changed its heartbeat. The legions no longer fought for Rome the idea, they fought for Rome the man who paid them. When command in the east was taken from him, Lucius Cornelius Sulla turned his legions toward home, something no general had dared. Rome, that mother of laws, felt her own children storm her gates. Streets once lined with philosophers echoed with the tramp of boots. Prescriptions followed, lists pinned like curses, names traded for safety. The Republic bled itself in the name of order, and freedom flinched behind closed shutters. Sulla, pale and precise, remade the state as if rearranging chess pieces. He trimmed powers, fortified senate walls, and wrote reforms in a steady hand with conviction and wine. But power kept its toll collector nearby. When he finally retired to his gardens, the city exhaled like a patient between fevers. Statues of him gleamed under sun and dust alike, reminders that even victory over chaos leaves cracks in marble. He was called Magnus before his beard had grey in it. Pompey swept eastward like a sunrise, scattering pirates and petty kings. In his triumphs Rome found comfort, an image of order made flesh. Yet gold glints sharpest before it dulls, and envy sharpened in the Senate's marble corners. Marcus Crassus, wealth made restless, bought water when Rome burned and dreamed of glory to match his gold. He chased it east to Parthia, and lost it in the desert, his ambition quenched in dust. Between them rose Julius Caesar, a pen in one hand and a sword in the other, carving his legend into the cold forests of Gaul. He bridged rivers, subdued tribes, and wrote dispatches that turned slaughter into literature. Rome read, half in horror and half in pride, realizing that its provinces were his classroom. When he returned, no one could unsee what he had become. 3 men, Pompey, Crassus, and Caesar, bound ambition into a fragile braid. When it frayed, the Republic split with it. Crassus vanished in Parthia, Pompey fled east and fell to betrayal. Caesar, crossing the Rubicon with quiet certainty, carried the river of history with him. Civil war was quick and cold. At Pharsalus, Caesar's veterans met Pompey's might and broke it like surf against rock. In Egypt, the conqueror met Cleopatra, queen and cipher, and found in her both alliance and myth. The Nile reflected their barge like prophecy, 2 worlds shimmering as one. Back in Rome, Caesar rebuilt what war had scattered, calendars corrected, debts forgiven, roads reborn. Mercy became his trademark, and mercy frightened those who owed him theirs. On the Ides of March, knives found his back where loyalty should have been. His blood slicked the marble of a republic already gasping. From the vacuum stepped Antony, soldier and sensualist, and Octavian, Caesar's quiet heir with steel beneath the calm. Together they avenged him, crushing the murderers at Philippi before turning suspicion on each other. Antony drifted east to Cleopatra's arms, Octavian west to discipline and strategy. Their fleets met off Actium. Wind and smoke decided what centuries would call destiny. Cleopatra's sails vanished first, Antony followed, love heavier than duty. Octavian watched the horizon clear and knew the world now belonged to him. Rome welcomed him not as tyrant but as healer. He named himself Augustus, the revered one, and ruled through peace so perfect it felt rehearsed. Temples rose, taxes flowed, roads stitched provinces into one enormous heartbeat. The gates of Janus, god of war, closed for the first time in memory. Brick became marble, chaos became ceremony. The Senate still met, but its debates were music written for one listener. Augustus smiled, poets praised, and the empire's machinery purred. From Spain to Syria, law traveled faster than rumor. To guard him, he formed the Praetorian Guard, Rome's wolves in polished armor, sworn to protect, destined to meddle. Beneath their gleaming discipline, whispers multiplied like vines. Yet for a time the Pax Romana held, grain from Africa, silk from China, peace measured not in victories but in continuance. When Augustus died, the empire bowed its head as though a god had passed. His stepson Tiberius ruled with competence and caution, retreating to the cliffs of Capri where suspicion was his companion. Then came Caligula, all brightness and madness, a comet too close to the earth. After Trajan's glory came Hadrian, builder and traveler, a man who understood that empires cannot grow forever without splitting at the seams. He crossed every frontier himself, feeling the pulse of lands too wide to govern by rumor. Where his predecessors had conquered, he measured. Where they had advanced, he marked the boundary and said, "Enough." In the north, he drew a wall across Britain, a long, grey sigh of stone dividing Rome from the wind. Soldiers built it, guarded it, and grew old beside it, their carvings and names etched into the very bones of the frontier. Beyond it, tribes watched from the mist, whispering promises of later centuries. Hadrian loved order, but he also loved beauty. He rebuilt cities, sponsored temples, and sculpted grief when his beloved Antinous drowned in the Nile. Statues of the boy rose across the empire, serene and sorrowful, the emperor's mourning turned to marble. When Hadrian died, he left behind not more territory but better foundations. Antoninus Pius followed, ruling like a kindly steward. His reign was peace itself, no conquests, no rebellions, only quiet prosperity. Laws softened, cities flourished, and few citizens ever saw a battlefield. Rome had grown so powerful that even its stillness felt majestic. It forgot what fear was. Then came Marcus Aurelius, philosopher in armor. Between campaigns against the restless tribes of the Danube, he wrote thoughts to himself about virtue, duty, and the smallness of human anger. His soldiers loved him, not for miracles, but for his calm in the face of chaos. He fought, not to expand the world, but to keep it intact. Plague followed his army home, silent and merciless. The empire coughed and shivered, losing millions. Markets emptied, temples filled, and pyres burned night and day. Still Marcus endured, writing under the dim light of his tent about endurance, about kindness, about the shortness of all things. His words would outlive the marble they were written beside. His son Commodus inherited the purple but not the philosophy. He sought applause instead of order, stepping into the arena dressed as Hercules reborn, striking at lions and men alike. Rome laughed, then flinched, then whispered. When assassins finally silenced him, no one mourned long. The empire was tired of being entertained by its own decline. Chaos followed, emperors sold like property to the highest bidder, generals marching on Rome as if it were just another prize. Provinces rebelled, armies fractured, and plague returned for its encore. The 3rd century was a fever dream of blood and bankruptcy. Then came Aurelian, a soldier forged from necessity. He reclaimed what had splintered, Gaul in the west, Palmyra in the east, and stitched the pieces together with steel and will. For a moment, unity returned, bright and brief as lightning. He built new walls around Rome itself, proof that even eternity could fear invasion. But daggers found him, too, and the empire staggered forward without him. Gold lost its value, temples lost their crowds, and even faiths multiplied like symptoms. From the east came Diocletian, organizer and reformer. He divided the empire into 4, giving it 2 emperors and 2 heirs. The Tetrarchy, he called it, a geometry of power meant to preserve order. For a while, it worked. He fixed prices, appointed armies of clerks, and demanded worship of the old gods to unify the weary masses. But a new faith, one that refused such demands, had been spreading quietly through homes and catacombs. Christianity had no altars of marble, only conviction, and conviction can be stubborn. Persecution followed, yet the fire only hardened it. Among Diocletian's heirs rose Constantine, son of ambition and soldier's luck. On the eve of battle, he dreamed of a sign, a radiant cross and words that promised victory. The next day, he fought under that symbol and won. The empire changed direction with the turn of his standard. Among Diocletian's heirs rose Constantine, son of ambition and soldier's luck. On the eve of battle, he dreamed of a sign, a radiant cross and words that promised victory. The next day, he fought under that symbol and won. The empire changed direction with the turn of his standard. He legalized the new faith, then favored it, then embraced it. Bishops replaced augurs, churches replaced temples. Yet he ruled with the same imperial instinct as any Caesar before him. At Nicaea, he gathered priests to settle doctrine, as though theology could be made to march in rank and file. They wrote a creed instead of a treaty and called it peace. In time, Constantine sought a capital that would match his vision of a reborn empire, eastward, rich, and defensible. On the shores of the Bosporus, he built it, Constantinople, New Rome, a city of marble and mosaics where Asia and Europe shook hands. When he died, his empire stretched from the Atlantic to the deserts, from the Danube to the Nile. But its heart had shifted. The old gods slept beneath dust, the Senate had become a ceremony, and the empire's soul had been baptized in a new light. Julian came after Constantine, scholar and skeptic, the last flicker of the pagan flame. He tried to recall the old gods with hymns and philosophy, to build a bridge back to the temples abandoned in haste. Statues were garlanded again, sacrifices smoked upon forgotten stones. But the world had already turned. His dream faded as he fell in battle, and with him, the old order exhaled its last breath. Theodosius, stern and devout, made Christianity the empire's single faith. Temples closed, idols shattered, the ancient hymns replaced by psalms. Rome's gods of marble gave way to saints of paint and gold. The city that once ruled through conquest now ruled through creed. Even as its armies thinned, its churches multiplied, and power began to wear a halo. Across the Danube, refugees gathered, Goths, driven by the Huns' thunder. Rome, stretched thin, let them in as allies, then cheated them with rotting grain and broken promises. Hunger and pride turned them to rebellion. At Adrianople, their arrows darkened the sky, and an emperor fell with thousands beside him. Rome learned that its legions were no longer invincible. The Goths moved south, led by Alaric, once Rome's own mercenary. When demands for justice failed, he marched upon the eternal city. In the year 410, Rome's gates opened from within, and the world's greatest city was plundered. The invaders moved through its temples with uneasy reverence, taking gold but sparing stone, as though they, too, knew they were touching legend. The Vandals came next, sailing from Africa to Italy with a precision Rome had forgotten. They took what was left, coins, relics, hope, and left silence behind. Provinces drifted away, Gaul, Spain, Africa, each forgetting the Latin tongue one generation at a time. Far off in Britain, the legions packed their standards and waited for orders that never came. They sailed away, leaving roads and walls to crumble under ivy. Rome's northern children grew wild again, and the island slipped quietly into its own dark age. In 476, a German soldier named Odoacer deposed the boy Emperor Romulus Augustulus. No armies marched in protest, no oracles wept. The Senate simply sent the imperial regalia east, saying that one emperor, in Constantinople, was enough. The Western Empire was gone, but the idea of Rome, its laws, its language, its weight, still ruled every mind that had ever been touched by it. In the East, emperors still wore the purple. Justinian dreamed of reconquest and, through the brilliance of his general Belisarius, almost achieved it. Africa, Italy, even Rome itself briefly returned to the fold. But war drains faster than it fills. Cities burned, treasuries emptied, and plague crept through Constantinople like a whisper of punishment. Yet from those ashes rose the Hagia Sophia, dome of light so vast it seemed to hang from heaven by a golden chain. When the plague passed, the empire was smaller but wiser. Belisarius died loyal and poor, his victories fading into rumor. The Lombards came, carving Italy into fragments, and emperors retreated to their shining fortress by the Bosporus. There, surrounded by marble and mosaics, the Eastern Empire became something new, Byzantium, heir to Rome's name but not its arrogance. The centuries that followed were made of endurance. Arabs swept across the old provinces, preaching a new faith. The Byzantines fought back with invention and prayer, unleashing Greek fire upon the sea, flame that burned even on water, a defiance made chemical. Their ships became torches that kept the night at bay. The empire adapted. Its soldiers became farmers, its generals governors, its people bound by faith rather than frontier. It traded conquests for survival and found that endurance was its greatest victory. The icons returned after centuries of debate, painted faces of saints that glowed in candlelight and reminded a weary world that devotion outlasts decree. Then came Basil, the Bulgar slayer, who ruled with iron calm and turned invasion into legend. Under him, Byzantium seemed reborn, its borders strong, its coffers full. But after his death, intrigue returned, as it always does. Power passed from hand to trembling hand until even victory tasted like memory. The Crusaders came, first as allies, then as thieves. In 1204, they breached the Golden Horn, sacking the greatest city of Christendom in the name of faith. For 3 days, Constantinople burned, not to pagans this time, but to its fellow Christians. When the flames died, Byzantium was broken, its treasures scattered across cathedrals that still glitter with stolen light. The emperors returned decades later, but the city was a ghost of its former self, its walls still proud, its spirit bruised. The empire shrank to its capital and a handful of towns. Scholars debated as soldiers deserted, artists painted as cannons drew near. In 1453, the final siege began. Sultan Mehmed II brought gunpowder and prophecy. The cannons roared for weeks, shaking foundations laid 1,000 years before. Inside, Emperor Constantine XI donned armor and prayed. When the final breach came, he vanished into the chaos, sword in hand, becoming one more anonymous stone in the city's defense. When the Ottomans entered, they found Hagia Sophia waiting, vast and silent. Its mosaics shimmered in the dim light as the conqueror bowed to the floor and gave thanks. The cross was lowered, the crescent raised, and the city was reborn again, no longer Roman, but never not Rome. And so the empire ended, not in fire, but in transformation. The laws it wrote, the roads it laid, the ideas it kindled would outlive every marble it ever carved. The wolf's children, the senators, the Caesars, the saints, all became threads in the same endless tapestry. For Rome was never just a city, nor a time, nor a crown. It was the human wish to build something that lasts. It was the whisper that says we are more than dust. Even when the last stone fell and the last anthem faded, Rome endured, in language, in faith, in dream. And somewhere, beneath the world's noise, that ancient city still sleeps, waiting for another dawn. The entire history of ancient Egypt. The river began as a rhythm before it was a road, flood, seed, harvest, rest, beating against the silence of the desert like a steady heart. Mud gathered where the water sighed to a stop, dark and generous, and people learned to place their hopes where the silt was deepest. In the evenings, they watched the sky ripen with stars and gave them names, as if labeling the lights could make the darkness kinder. Villages rose on higher mounds, safe from the water's yearly hunger. Clay learned the shape of bowls, reeds learned the shape of boats. Hunters traced gazelle tracks along the edge of green while fishers read the surface like scripture. Every year the river forgot their names and remembered them again, and in that forgetting and remembering, people learned patience. Stone knives flashed in workshops that smelled of dust and fire. Artists combed the riverbanks for pigments, red like rusted sunrise, black like wet soil, green like the promise after flood. The first palettes held not makeup, but meaning, falcons for the fierce sky, cattle for the slow power of wealth, serpents for the places where the earth's skin wrinkled into mystery. Trade crept in before conquest did. Boats hugged the current, carrying oil, linen, copper, and stories. From the south came gold dust that glittered like concentrated sunlight, from the east came incense, soft as breath when burned. Strangers learned one another's measures by the weight of a jar and the honesty of a scale. The river had two long arms, one cradling the south and one the north, and each learned to love its own reflection. Chieftains wore reed crowns that wilted only after the feasts ended, and standards lifted animal emblems against the wind, hawk, jackal, bull. Pride hardened into boundary, boundary into rivalry, and somewhere a scribe sharpened his reed to record the first complaint. When the day of joining came, it arrived with deliberate steps. A king from the south walked the river like a thread through a needle, sewing shores together with victory and ceremony. Two crowns touched one brow, white and red whispering the same word, one. In the temple courtyards, the gods nodded as if they had always known. They named the new center at the place where the land bent to listen, Memphis, where the river's choice could be overseen. There, courtiers practiced the art of balance, weighing taxes against flood marks, justice against mercy. The palace smelled of lotus and new stone, the granaries smelled of certainty. Writing, once a handful of pictures, learned to move faster than memory. Signs for water and house and God began to lean on each other, building ladders of thought. On jars and tags and tablets, the king's name sprang up like a boundary stone in language, and with it came a strange relief: what is written can be found again. The dead asked for houses of their own, and the living obliged. Low mastabas rose, rectangles of brick where priests could murmur the right words and servants could leave bread and beer. The journey to forever needed supplies. Eternity, it turned out, had practical requirements. Families visited with baskets like small boats, ferrying love to the other shore. A wise healer architect measured stone the way a physician measures pulse. He turned stacked steps toward the sky, persuading a tomb to become a staircase for a soul. People craned their necks and felt something lift inside their chests, as if a new verb had been invented, to ascend. The desert, once only horizon, learned the grammar of height. Kings learned to dream in limestone. They tested angles like sailors test winds, seeking the slope that made weight forget itself. Whole villages were drafted into a single intention: quarry, hall, align, repeat. Beneath the sun, a choreography of labor turned sweat into geometry. The great ones rose where the desert meets the edge of green, faces turned to the path of the sun. Blocks found their places as if obeying a remembered plan, joints tight as promises. In the shadow of that certainty, market stalls thrived, children played in dust, and priests timed prayers to the footfalls of the seasons. A lion with a man's calm watched from the sand, its gaze flat as noon. It guarded not only an acropolis but an idea, that order could be made from chaos and then sculpted into calm. Travelers arrived with sand in their sandals and awe in their throats, and even the wind seemed to lower its voice. At the borderlands, the world pushed back. Raiders tasted the edges like curious wolves, and patrols learned the names of unfamiliar hills. Scouts returned with stories of copper in the Sinai and hard men in the west, of dark water in the south that carried barges filled with gold and ebony. The king's reach lengthened alongside the oar's rhythm. In halls cool with pillars and shade, judges listened as if their patience could restore balance by itself. They called that balance maut, and set it like a feather on the scale of every choice. Farmers watched the gauge poles and knew that justice might be as simple as a fair flood and as hard as a straight verdict. Seasons stitched prosperity into habit. Granaries swelled and breathed, markets clattered with copper and chatter. Priests read the stars until the calendar learned to predict the river's mood, and farmers hitched their labor to a schedule written in light. Children grew, and their lullabies sounded suspiciously like hymns. When the floods failed, the earth showed its ribs. Cracks webbed the fields and worry webbed the faces. Barges scraped the riverbed, officials counted grain with tighter lips. Yet even hunger could not fully untie the knot people had made with the river. They waited, and the water returned like a promise kept late but kept. The king who reigned long enough to become an era watched boys become ministers and ministers become memories. Stability stretched thin, like gold hammered to leaf, still bright but frail at the edges. In distant garrisons, men learned to salute commanders whose orders came with less certainty and more negotiation. Local lords found their voices and then their teeth. The court learned that distance can be a kind of rebellion, quiet at first, a delayed shipment, a miscounted herd, a temple left unrepaired. The land, once a single breath, became shallow breathing in many chests. Scribes sharpened their pens and wrote reports that smelled faintly of warning. And yet the river kept time. In the cool before dawn, farmers shouldered tools and stepped into fields that had trusted them since they were children. Women washed linen in the shallows, laughter skipping like pebbles across the surface. The desert did what deserts do, kept the records no one else could keep, wind writing around stones that watched without blinking. Beyond every boundary, rumor claimed a sharper world, hard men with strange tongues, glittering stones in carved valleys, gods who preferred mountain air. Caravans risked the heat in exchange for wonder. They returned with incense that turned smoke into prayer and with wounds that turned caution into policy. The kings who followed inherited not only crowns but questions. How much stone does a soul require? How many soldiers does a border demand? They answered with temples and expeditions, with treaties that tasted of wine and with skirmishes that tasted of iron. Each solution bought time, and time bought the illusion of permanence. When the sun sank, the city glowed, lamps in courtyards, stars above, the slow music of conversations unwinding the day. Somewhere in the palace, a child traced a falcon on wet clay and understood, without knowing why, that to draw is to promise. The future waited politely at the door, listening to the river breathe. Stone rose like a second horizon, tier upon luminous tier, until the desert itself seemed to be learning how to breathe upward. Quarries woke before dawn, and thousands of hands turned raw rock into obedient blocks. Overseers counted, engineers measured, and along ramps as broad as streets, sledges slid with the hiss of wet sand beneath them. Each block had a place, and each place had a purpose, and in that choreography the nation found its rhythm. At Giza the sun paused, to admire its own reflection. One king's vision became a mountain of precision, his sons a cousin to the first, his grandsons, a statement of grace where the slope softened to kindness. Below, the living city thrived on the gravity of greatness, bakers kneaded, brewers tended vats that murmured like shallow waves, carpenters smoothed sled runners until they sang. No one worked alone, even the gods were thought to lean their invisible shoulders into the stone. Priests, smelling of cedar and clean linen, fed the gods with a timetable more accurate than hunger. They washed statues and dressed them, opened mouths that could not speak and yet, somehow, did. The sun's boat sailed across painted ceilings, and every dawn was a rehearsal of forever. In storerooms cool with shadow, offerings piled like the steady definition of faith, bread, beer, onions, salt. The tombs were not houses for the dead so much as guarantees for the living. If order is maintained here, it will be maintained everywhere. Caravans pushed north along the coast to Byblos, returning with cedar that refused to warp in the heat. Expeditions cut turquoise from Sinai's hard blue ribs and copper from its buried fires. To the south, the river narrowed into rapids that sang against the hull and led into a realm of gold and dark wood. Nubian chiefs greeted emissaries with measured pride, treaties were cut into stone and sealed with gifts that smelled of resin and consequence. The court perfected the politics of patience. Courtiers spoke in careful metaphors, scribes weighed words as if they might break a scale. A just decree could turn a poor harvest into survival and a rich harvest into prosperity. Flood markers were consulted like oracles, and when the river rose sweetly and fell slowly, cheeks relaxed across the nation as if one great face had decided to smile. Time, generous at first, grew thin at the edges. A long-lived king became a century's habit, his monuments took on the calm of mountains. Yet the longer a reign extends, the farther its fingertips must reach to touch the edges, and out there, beyond the court's easy eyesight, local lords learned that distance is a species of opportunity. Temples accrued estates, officials accrued favors, what had been a single voice modulated into a choir that sometimes forgot the melody. The flood faltered. One year, then another, the river arrived late and stingy, laying down a stingy quilt where it used to lay a thick blanket. Cracks spidered across fields. Men leaned on hoes that had nothing to bite. Granaries, once generous, learned how to clench. Travelers returned with the same news from everywhere, the Nile's hand had become a fist. In the lull between prayers, worry discovered its own voice. When the center weakens, borders harden into teeth. Nomarchs, regional lords who had once sent grain and gratitude, built their own tombs with a confidence that sounded like independence. They issued justice from halls that smelled of local cedar rather than distant authority. The king's cartouche, still carved on doorways, began to look like a polite fiction. The old order thinned until one could see through it to something harsher. Two houses rose to claim what unity had dropped, one in the north among low lakes and reeds, one in the south where cliffs burn rose at sunset. Between them, messengers faded into dust and soldiers wrote their names in soot on shields. Battles were less thunder than attrition, skirmishes brooming across canals and field margins. The land remembered conquest the way a body remembers a fever, hot, exhausting, reluctant to end. In the south, a line of rulers taking the name Intef planted their banners beneath cliffs that folded like a falcon's wing. They gathered loyalty not just with spears but with fairness, canals dredged, temples repaired, tombs permitted that honored local pride while nodding toward a larger horizon. People, tired of uncertainty, drifted toward the leaders who spoke softly and kept their promises. The war to restore one world lasted long enough to be inherited. A prince commanded what his father had only imagined, a king completed what his grandfather had only begun. In the end it was not a great battle but a sequence of relentlessness that opened the north. City by city the silted channels were cleared of fear. When the last barriers fell, people did not cheer so much as exhale. Unity arrived like rain after a season of ash. The victor stood under cliffs painted by late light and stitched both crowns to his brow with ceremonial thread. His processions were solemn rather than triumphant. He looked at the damage and ordered repairs. In the reopened temples, incense rose in grateful spirals. Scribes, who had sharpened their pens for complaint, now sharpened them for praise, and did it with relief. New centers rose. At its joy the court set itself down like a carefully balanced weight that could hold the reed mat of the kingdom flat. The army became a river of its own, fortresses anchored along the southern cataracts, their storehouses square and stubborn, their watchtowers turned toward the deeper Nile. Traders moving between the fortresses and the court threaded safety into commerce, and commerce into stability. A new style of greatness emerged, less about impossible stones, more about perfect ones. Statues of kings and queens sat with an alert calm, their laps squared to the world, their faces forgiving nothing but foreseeing everything. Literature bloomed, teachings for sons, tales of courtiers who fled and returned, hymns that now sounded both intimate and grand. The nation's voice grew complex without growing confused. Engineers widened basins and stitched the river's backwaters to fields that had never seen such attention. Lake regions to the west were cradled with dikes and ditches, turning the patient marsh into obedient farmland. With each season the country remembered how prosperity sounds, the clatter of jars, the scuff of sandals, the argument about prices, the laughter that ends prices anyway. Beyond the delta, strangers with sharp beards and multicolored cloaks began to appear more often. They came as merchants and sometimes stayed as workers, bringing their own goods packed like household goods, their own words folded into a few of ours. The border posts learned to recognize their shoes by their prints. Hospitality made room even as vigilance kept a ledger. Kings named Senusrit, and a meaning that took turns embodying caution and reach. Campaigns probed south to affirm the fortress's purpose, expeditions north kept the sea traders honest. At Byblos, Egyptian officials inspected cedar shipments with the same care as prayers. At Kerma, Nubian chiefs were greeted with gifts that half concealed how carefully we watched them. Each treaty was a net for risk, each victory a reminder that nets fray. At home, the state perfected its own memory. Census takers crossed the countryside like quiet weather, counting cattle and men and harvests. Tax scribes tallied and then tallied the tallies. Even crime was categorized with a new neatness, punishments measured to fit offenses like fitted lids on storage jars. Mercy learned the same geometry as discipline. The arts grew confident enough to admit tenderness. Reliefs showed not just the serene eternal faces of royalty but the half-smiles of workers and the shy glance of a musician toward a friend. Tomb photographs cut into stone revealed not merely the wealth of the departed, but their preferences, favorite geese, favorite songs, the way a hand rests on a shoulder in gratitude that no theology demanded but every heart understood. Warnings returned, disguised as success. Fortresses to the south reported more raids testing the laddered mudbrick. To the northeast, caravan leaders asked for escorts they had never before required. Refugee families sought work in numbers that made the overseers nervous. Famine years abroad created pressure on our plenty. The river still rose, but it now felt watched by unseen eyes. Inside the palace, the old problem, succession, knocked at the door as it always does. One king solved it by naming his heir while still vigorous, standing with him in ceremonies until the nation learned 2 faces for 1 office. It worked, and then it didn't, because systems are only as strong as the men who tend them. After a lineage of calm, sharper tempers took over, and court factions lifted their heads like cobras warmed by spring. Meanwhile, the new neighbors to the north sharpened their own ambitions. They built their towns deep in the delta's green maze, half Egyptian by habit and half something else by ancestry. They learned our language with a crisp accent and used it in contracts that profited them most. Their wagons rolled and rolled, and behind the circles the ruts bit a little deeper each season. Soldiers returning from the southern forts told stories of archers, whose arrows flew farther than seems reasonable, and of cattle raids that dissolved into the desert without footprints to follow. The commanders learned to lay a defense in depth, scouts in reeds, watchfires mirrored by watchfires. It worked, until it didn't, because cleverness breeds more cleverness. Through it all, the people continued to live, a miracle so ordinary that history often forgets to praise it. Children jumped irrigation ditches and fell in with shrieks, mothers hauled baskets of cool cucumbers past dogs that considered theft and thought better of it, grandfathers told the same joke 3 times in one afternoon. The country's endurance was woven from small joys and the stubbornness to repeat them. The royal workshops began to carve protective gods with teeth, spirits with knives, and gates guarded by names that must be pronounced perfectly to pass. The afterlife's paperwork grew intricate, as if responding to the feeling that the world beyond the palace walls had become less negotiable. What we feared on earth we tried to master in spells. In border towns, dawn sometimes came with smoke. The enemy was no single tribe or king but a do-it-yourself coalition of opportunists, a talent for finding weak places, and the patience to push until pushing wasn't necessary. Raids became occupations, occupations became claims. Letters to the court took on edges, ink biting into fiber. Reassurances came back equally sharp, but ink does not halt hooves. And yet, even as the pressure mounted, memory did its work. The land recalled that it had fallen before and risen after. The river recalled its obligation to spread dark silk across the fields. Priests, whose prayers might be mistaken for habit, prayed harder. Men whose lives could be mistaken for routine lifted their eyes and saw a longer line running through the present into a future where order would again be a furniture of the days. What followed would be both disaster and invention, the long entrance of foreigners who wore our jewelry with their own clothes, who learned our rights while swearing fealty to their own lords, the birth, inside the pressure, of new weapons, new strategies, new kinds of alliances. The next kings would need to speak more languages than one, steel, cunning, compromise, and learn to braid them into survival. Night folded over the river, and once more the stars took their seats where the priests had placed them. Somewhere in a garrison a young officer read a dispatch and then read it again, hearing in the courteous script the thud of boots that had already crossed a border. Somewhere in a temple a girl plucked a harp and found that an old melody still fit a new heart. The desert breathed its slow, undeceived breath. Tomorrow would bring envoys, and somewhere beyond them, enemies, then, later, allies wearing yesterday's enemy's face. But for the moment, in the cool between flood and harvest, a country lay on its back beneath a sky it had mapped, and trusted, as it always had, that the river would remember the way home. The first winds of change did not roar, they whispered. Traders from the north began to wear new metals on their belts, the faint glint of bronze replacing copper's softer shine. In taverns along the delta, rumors of powerful cities beyond the sea traded hands like coins. Egypt listened politely but did not yet believe that the world could ever grow larger than the Nile. Then the Hyksos came, riders with fast horses and chariots that moved like thoughts, wheels flashing in the sun. They did not descend as an army at first but as settlers, merchants, guests who spoke of partnership. But partnership has a habit of leaning toward possession. Forts changed flags without falling, governors signed papers that turned into chains. The invaders brought new gods whose names sounded like questions, And in those questions Egypt heard doubt for the first time in centuries. Cities in the north bent under foreign rule, their temples still smoking with incense even as foreign banners shadowed their courtyards. In the south, proud Thebes tightened its fist. Princes there refused to call strangers kings. They wrote letters filled with civility and sent spies disguised as merchants. And as the years went by, a quiet vow ripened: the Nile would remember its own language again. From Thebes, a line of warriors arose: Sakonra, whose skull would later tell the story of his bravery; Komos, who struck north with the fury of a river breaking a dam; and finally Omos, who learned both patience and vengeance. Under his command, the chariots of the Hyksos met the chariots of Egypt on a field where dust and sunlight mixed into prophecy. When it ended, the strangers fled across Sinai, and Egypt breathed in its own air again, rich with smoke and relief. Omos did not stop at victory. He reorganized the army, trained sailors who could steer by stars, and reopened quarries that had slept since the last golden age. Craftsmen returned to their benches, temples to their chants. Children learned the word king again as something native to their own mouths. The nation, newly humble and newly proud, looked outward and saw opportunity instead of threat. Campaigns pushed south into Nubia to reclaim the gold fields, expeditions sailed north to the Levant, where tribute became both profit and warning. The palace at Thebes gleamed with spoils: lapis from distant mountains, silver from mysterious lands across the sea, cedar beams longer than dreams. Egypt's isolation, once its armor, became a bridge. Thutmose I marked his reign with clarity. He marched until he saw another river, smaller than the Nile but wide enough to reflect ambition, the Euphrates. There he set a stela, a monument that said not just "I was here," but "we can be anywhere." His daughter Hatshepsut would later read those words and decide that the empire could wear elegance as well as armor. When Hatshepsut became king, refusing the smaller title of queen, courtiers blinked but obeyed. She dressed in the symbols of power: false beard, pleated kilt, the calm stance of eternity. Under her rule, peace fattened the treasuries. Traders sailed to Punt, bringing back incense trees, ivory, and tales of soft-skinned strangers. Architecture blossomed like a controlled flood, terraced temples carved into cliffs that caught morning light like laughter. After her, Thutmose III took the throne and turned the empire into a heartbeat felt across continents. His armies moved with practiced grace, striking at cities that had once sneered at Egypt's long silences. Lists of tribute read like catalogues of the known world: gold, cattle, chariots, glass, the loyalty of kings who learned to bow in Egyptian rhythm. The scribes called him the Napoleon of his age long before Napoleon was even an echo. Under Amenhotep II and Thutmose IV, the wealth continued to flow. Artists filled tomb walls with delicate lines and confident colors, fields of maize, dancers in mid-turn, the glint of a fish in a net. Temples rang with hymns that praised order as if it were perfume. The land had rediscovered its stride, and for a time it seemed that Maut, balanced itself, had taken up residence beside the Nile forever. But peace breeds questions. The priests of Amun, rich and respected, built their own kingdoms inside the temples. Pharaohs found themselves negotiating with gods who now had accountants. Into that tension was born Amenhotep IV, a dreamer who decided that one son was enough. He closed the temples, erased old names, and built a new city for a new god, Aten, whose light needed no priests to interpret it. He renamed himself Akhenaten, and in that name the world tilted. The capital moved to Amarna, its avenues straight as dogma, its art suddenly human and tender, lovers touching hands, the royal family eating beneath the rays of a sun that ended in tiny fingers. For a generation the old gods went silent, their statues sleeping beneath dust. Some found freedom in this new simplicity, Others found only emptiness. When Akhenaten died, the pendulum swung back with the strength of nostalgia. The boy Tutankhaten restored the temples and the old ways, changing his name to Tutankhamun. The court exhaled, the sculptors reopened their chisels. Though his reign was brief, his death would last forever, his tomb hidden so well that centuries later it would make the world remember Egypt anew. Generals took the crowns after the fragile kings. Horemheb, practical and unsentimental, erased the heretic's memory with a thoroughness that even time admired. The gods were appeased, the scribes realigned the calendars, and the empire's machinery creaked back into motion. Yet something subtle had shifted. The old certainty that Pharaoh was half divine now carried the faint echo of doubt. Still, the empire pushed on. Seti I carved his victories deep into the walls of Karnak, his son Ramses II into the cliffs of Abu Simbel. Ramses ruled longer than most men lived, building temples that glowed red at dawn and statues, so vast that the desert itself seemed small. He signed the world's first peace treaty with the Hittites after a battle that left neither side sure of victory but both sure of fatigue. For a time the Nile sang again. Families painted their tombs with confident hands, artisans perfected glass, scribes copied hymns older than memory. But beyond the borders, the wind was shifting once more. New tribes were on the move, pressing westward, and the bronze that had once defined superiority was giving way to iron, a metal harder, cheaper, and carried by newcomers who had no awe of pyramids. The kings that followed Ramses the Great bore his name but not his strength. Grain stores dwindled, temples claimed more than they contributed, and foreign mercenaries began to serve in the very armies meant to keep them out. The Libyans came not as invaders but as employees, settling in lands that soon called them landlords. In the delta, power fractured again, as predictable as the seasons and twice as stubborn. The waves came first. Not of water, but of people. The sea peoples arrived like a tide that could not be read by the stars, warriors from somewhere beyond the maps, their ships curved like crescents, their armor gleaming like fish scales. They struck the coastlands of every kingdom in their path, and Egypt felt the tremor before she saw their sails. Under Ramses III, the old lion stirred one last time. He raised his armies, fortified the delta, and met the invaders at the river's mouth. Arrows filled the sky, ships collided in whirlpools of chaos. When the smoke cleared, Egypt still stood. Ramses carved his victory deep into stone, a monument to defiance. But even triumph carries a cost. The treasury, drained by survival, whispered warnings that the stone could not silence. The following centuries were quieter, but not calmer. Kings reigned from two thrones again, one in the north, one in the south. Priests at Thebes held more power than generals, their temples owning half the land. Pharaohs became shadows behind the incense smoke, figures of ceremony rather than command. In the villages, the people continued their rhythm of sowing and harvest, trusting that eternity would somehow notice. Beyond Egypt's borders, the world was learning new words: iron, empire, Assyria. The Assyrians rose in the east with cruelty polished to efficiency, their chariots iron-shod, their kings proud of fear. When they looked toward Egypt, it was no longer a mystery but a prize. The two powers met not with awe, but with suspicion. Egypt, old but not yet spent, played diplomacy like a seasoned scribe plays ink, sparingly, carefully, hoping to outlast the impatience of youth. Libyan princes settled in the delta, their children learning Egyptian songs and wearing Egyptian linen, their accents fading across generations until no one remembered a time before they belonged. Yet their loyalties were layered: blood to the desert, oaths to the Nile. The result was a patchwork of dynasties, names interwoven with foreign syllables. The throne still glittered, but its legs were uneven. Then, from the south, where the Nile narrows into stone corridors, a new power stirred. The kings of Kush, dark-skinned and fierce, looked north and saw not conquest but inheritance. They considered themselves restorers, not usurpers, heirs to a legacy that had drifted into neglect. Under Pa, the armies of Nubia moved north like a returning tide, subduing city after city until Thebes itself opened its gates. Egypt bowed again, but this time to a mirror of herself. The Kushite pharaohs ruled with dignity, repairing temples, reinstating forgotten rituals, breathing life into a faith that had survived more defeats than most civilizations could imagine. Under Taharqa, Egypt stood proudly again, its borders guarded, its gods praised, its people believing that the old rhythm had found its way home. But the East was waking. Assyria's kings had eyes sharper than vultures and ambitions broader than rivers. They came in iron, their siege engines dragging thunder behind them. The Kushite pharaohs fought with valor, but even valor bows before machinery. Memphis fell, then Thebes. The Assyrians burned what they couldn't carry and left what they couldn't understand. Egypt survived in fragments, city-states ruled by governors who called themselves pharaohs and meant it only half. When the fire passed, the land tried again. The kings of Say in the delta gathered the pieces and polished them until they shone. They built fleets, traded with Greece, and filled their courts with scribes who wrote in 2 languages. For a moment, brief but bright, Egypt rediscovered its elegance. The statues grew serene again, art remembered balance, grain filled the bins. But in the north, new sails appeared, not invaders this time, but students. Greek travelers came seeking wisdom. They asked the priests about stars and souls, and the priests answered with parables that became philosophy. In their temples, Herodotus would one day call Egypt the gift of the Nile, and the world would agree. Yet while they studied, others prepared to rule. From beyond the Tigris came the Persians, bearing fire altars and discipline. Cambyses, son of Cyrus, crossed the desert with patience and cunning, defeating Egypt's armies and claiming the double crown for Persia's kings. The temples were spared, the gods tolerated, but independence was gone. Egypt had joined an empire far larger than its own, its pharaoh now a satrap, its language still proud but edged with resignation. Yet the Nile does not forget. Rebellions flared, sputtered, flared again. Each uprising was a heartbeat, proof that the old spirit still pulsed beneath the foreign veneer. Some rebels died in obscurity, others carved their defiance in stone, knowing the sand would protect it until the right eyes found it again. Then came Alexander, young, luminous, unstoppable. He marched through the Persian Empire as if guided by myth, and Egypt opened its arms to him. At Memphis, priests crowned him pharaoh, at Siwa, the oracle called him son of Zeus. He founded a city on the coast and named it Alexandria, a bridge between 2 worlds, Greek logic and Egyptian faith, marble and sandstone, sun and sea. When Alexander died, his generals divided the world like scavengers dividing a god. Egypt fell to Ptolemy, who wore Macedonian blood but Egyptian robes. The Ptolemies spoke Greek in their palaces but prayed in Egyptian to the same gods who had heard prayers for 3,000 years. Temples rose again, hieroglyphs mingling with Greek inscriptions, and on the walls of Dendera and Edfu, the old religion made its last stand in beauty. Alexandria became a jewel, a city of scholars, traders, and ideas. In its library, scrolls whispered of every corner of the known world. Astronomers mapped the heavens from its terraces, physicians charted the body like a new kingdom. But knowledge attracts envy as surely as gold attracts conquest. The Romans came not with revelation but with pragmatism. They took the Nile's grain to feed their legions and let the temples sing as long as the taxes came on time. Cleopatra VII, last of the Ptolemies, understood that charm could be a weapon and intellect a shield. She spoke many tongues, ruled with flair, and sought to hold Rome's giants, Julius Caesar, then Antony, in her orbit. But Rome devours even its lovers. When the final battle ended at Actium, Egypt's flag sank beneath the waves, and the queen who called herself Isis chose death over chains. Rome claimed Egypt as its province, a crown jewel in an empire of iron. The old gods lingered in half-lit sanctuaries, their priests whispering prayers that had once moved mountains. Coptic monks later chanted new hymns in the same cadence as the old. The pyramids turned from places of faith to landmarks of curiosity, yet even curiosity is a kind of reverence. Centuries passed like the turning of a tide. Empires came and went, Byzantine, Arab, Ottoman, each leaving its words, its gods, its walls. Yet the Nile flowed unchanged, forgiving, eternal. Fishermen still cast their nets by starlight, farmers still read the river's color like a page of scripture. Beneath the dust, the old stories waited, patient as ever. For Egypt was not merely a nation. It was a rhythm that refused to die, a song of water and stone, of gods who once walked in sunlight and of people who, though conquered 100 times, never surrendered the habit of beginning again. And when the wind moves through the palm groves at dusk, it still carries the sound of chisels, the laughter of workers, the chant of priests, and the rustle of papyrus, the language of a civilization that learned how to make memory immortal. The entire history of the Ottoman Empire. In the restless twilight of the 13th century, when the ruins of old empires still smoked under the Anatolian sun, a small tribe rode through the grasslands. They were the sons of nomads, the keepers of horses and stories, moving with tents and herds between hills that had known both Romans and Seljuks. Their leader was Osman, a name not yet a title, a man who believed that destiny begins as a whisper in the dark. The Mongols had shattered kingdoms like pottery, and refugees flooded the west. Osman's people, too small to be noticed, settled in the shadow between giants, Byzantium to the west, fading Seljuks to the east. They built a fortress at Sogut, traded with villagers, and prayed at dawn under open sky. Osman dreamed of a tree that grew from his heart, its branches stretching across the world, shading the lands of many peoples. He awoke knowing it was not only a dream but a promise. Through raids and marriages, Osman's tribe grew. His son Orhan learned to hold a sword and a city with equal skill. When the fortress of Bursa fell, the Ottomans had their first capital, its domes and markets swelling with life. Orhan minted coins and built mosques, laying stone where once there had only been tents. Warriors of the faith, Ghazis, rode under his banner, calling him Bey of Beys, unaware that his descendants would one day be emperors of 3 continents. To the north and west, the Byzantines faltered, their empire thin as old parchment. The Ottomans crossed into Europe with silent precision, their flags fluttering on both sides of the Dardanelles. Villages along the Balkan hills awoke to new rulers who taxed less and governed more. Soldiers came not as conquerors but as administrators, planting order like seeds. Murad I brought discipline to the tide. His new army, the Janissaries, was unlike any before, trained from youth, loyal only to the Sultan, their ranks filled with boys taken from Christian families and raised as warriors of the state. Their drums beat like heartbeats at the edge of battle. When Murad fell in Kosovo, slain amid victory, his blood baptized a dynasty that would measure time by wars and prayers. His son Bayezid was lightning, swift and proud, known as Yildirim, the thunderbolt. He carved roads through enemies, took Thessaloniki, and surrounded Constantinople until the old empire gasped within its walls. But destiny, ever jealous of momentum, sent a counterstorm from the east. Timur the Lame, the conqueror of conquerors, descended from the steppes with an army like an avalanche. At Ankara, the two worlds collided, east against east, ambition against ambition. The thunderbolt was broken, his armies scattered, his sons divided. For a decade, the Ottoman lands trembled, split among rival heirs who fought like wolves under a blood moon. Villages whispered that perhaps the dynasty had been a dream after all. But from chaos rose Mehmed, son of Murad, grandson of victory. He studied not only swordplay but geometry, languages, and siegecraft. He rebuilt what the storm had undone, his eyes fixed on a single prize, the city whose domes had called empires to envy for 1,000 years, Constantinople. In the spring of 1453, his cannons roared across the Bosporus. Byzantine walls that had defied centuries shook beneath the thunder of gunpowder. The sea was chained, the land was swallowed by siegeworks. Priests and soldiers within the city prayed, while outside, Mehmed's armies prayed louder. On the 29th day of May, as dawn broke red, the crescent rose above the cross. Constantinople had fallen, and the world changed its calendar. They called him Fatih, the Conqueror. He entered the Hagia Sophia and ordered it cleansed but not destroyed, its vast dome echoing with new prayers. The city was renamed Istanbul, and from it, the Ottomans looked both east and west and saw no limit. Mosques rose where churches once stood, markets filled with silk and silver, scholars argued under colonnades. A new Rome had been born, and this one spoke Turkish. Mehmed's successors expanded the map as if it were clay. Bosnia, Albania, Serbia, and Greece bowed to the empire's order. In Anatolia, rival emirates were absorbed, in the Aegean, fleets spread like wings. The Ottoman sultans began to call themselves Padishah of the two lands and the two seas. Yet conquest alone could not define them, law, art, and architecture flourished alongside victory. The empire's cities hummed like verses of a long poem. Roads tied continents together, bridges arched across rivers like sentences between civilizations. Caravan bells jingled from Cairo to Edirne. And at the heart of it all stood the Sultan's palace, Topkapı, perched on the sea like a jewel, its courtyards perfumed with jasmine and intrigue. Under the stern eye of Selim I, the empire turned south. He marched through the Levant and into Egypt, humbling the Mamluk sultans who had once ruled the desert. The black stone of Mecca and the green dome of Medina came under Ottoman protection. The caliphate, the spiritual crown of Islam, now rested on the sultan's head. From the mountains of Kurdistan to the sands of Arabia, his word was law and his shadow was sanctuary. His son Suleiman inherited the empire at its most radiant moment. The world would know him as Kanuni, the lawgiver, or simply Suleiman the Magnificent. He was a warrior, poet, and legislator, his reign a tapestry woven of glory and grace. His fleets ruled the Mediterranean, his armies reached the gates of Vienna. His architect, Sinan, raised domes that rivaled heavens, airy, mathematical, immortal. His laws refined justice into symmetry, and his queen, Hurrem, proved that love could bend even empire. For 4 decades, Suleiman reigned like a sun at its zenith. But even the longest day must yield to dusk. His final campaigns were slower, his heart heavier. When he died on the battlefield of Hungary, his soldiers wept and hid his death until victory was secured, a fitting farewell to the age of brilliance. The empire he left behind spanned deserts, forests, and seas, stitched together by trade, faith, and fear. From the Danube to the Euphrates, men prayed in the same rhythm, judged by the same laws, governed by the same silent efficiency. Yet beneath the perfection, hairline cracks had begun to spread. After Suleiman, the light did not vanish, it dimmed. Empires, like men, rarely fall in a single breath. They fade, slowly, through comfort, inheritance, and time's quiet cruelty. The sultans who followed inherited palaces heavy with memory and thrones that whispered too many names. Some ruled with wisdom, others ruled from behind latticed windows, their hands soft from luxury rather than labor. Selim II, son of Suleiman and Hurrem, preferred poetry to politics, wine to war. But the machinery of the empire continued to turn, driven by the will of ministers and the discipline of soldiers, who knew their craft too well to forget it. Ottoman fleets still cut through the Mediterranean, their sails fat with wind and certainty. Yet in 1571, off the coast of Lepanto, Europe gathered its fleets into one armada, and for the first time in centuries, the crescent trembled. Cannons thundered, galleys burned, and the sea turned red with history. The Christian powers celebrated victory. The Ottomans, though defeated, built new ships within a year, as if to remind the world that loss was not the same as ruin. Still, something had changed. The myth of invincibility had cracked, and doubt, a small, patient enemy, had slipped through. Back in Istanbul, the empire glittered as if untouched. The Grand Bazaar hummed with merchants from 3 continents, spices and silks trading hands faster than empires changed borders. Architects raised mosques whose domes echoed the lost perfection of Sinan's geometry. But power, once radiating outward from the Sultan, now tangled itself in the corridors of the palace. Behind the screens of the harem, women whispered decisions that shaped provinces. Valide sultans, the mothers of rulers, became the quiet architects of fate. Eunuchs carried secrets through moonlit courtyards. Ministers plotted reforms while poets sang of past glories to make the present bearable. The palace was no longer a forge of destiny, it was a theater where ambition performed in soft voices. The Janissaries, once the empire's proudest guardians, grew fat on privilege. Their discipline softened, their loyalty diluted by politics and pay. They still marched, but with more noise than purpose. In the provinces, governors built personal fiefdoms. In distant lands, local warlords invoked the Sultan's name but not his authority. The 17th century arrived with gunpowder and discontent. Austria and Poland grew bold, Persia revived under the Safavids. The Ottoman frontiers, once rivers of conquest, became borders of defense. Armies marched slower now, weighed down by tradition as much as armor. Yet brilliance flickered even in the dusk. Kuprulu Mehmed Pasha, a statesman of ruthless clarity, seized control of the court and purged corruption with a surgeon's hand. His reforms steadied the ship, and his descendants, the Koprulus, steered it through storms that might have sunk lesser realms. Under their guidance, the empire rose again for one defiant generation. Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha believed that destiny had paused, waiting for a bold man to resume it. He gathered the empire's strength and marched once more toward Vienna, that glittering threshold between east and west. The siege began with prayers and confidence. Cannons battered walls, and the crescent fluttered above camps as large as cities. But Europe had learned from centuries of fear. Relief armies came from the west, and in 1683, the plains outside Vienna ran with defeat. The dream of European conquest ended there, beneath smoke and broken tents. The armies limped home, the Janissaries muttered in their ranks, the viziers argued about blame. Istanbul mourned quietly, its minarets pointing upward as if to ask heaven why ambition always costs so much. In the following decades, the empire turned inward. It still controlled a vast world, Arabia, the Balkans, Egypt, Anatolia, but its borders began to harden like cooling iron. The sultans were crowned in ceremony, their words carried by courtiers who translated them into policy, softened by compromise. The Ottoman system, once so supple, began to ossify in its own perfection. Commerce shifted. European ships, now sleek and wind-driven, circled Africa, and reached India without ever touching Ottoman ports. The caravans that once made the deserts sing now moved slower, emptier. Gold flowed into Europe instead of through Istanbul's markets. The empire remained rich in titles and tradition but poor in the coin of invention. Still, the call to prayer echoed from every hilltop, faithful as breath. In Bosnia and Cairo, Damascus and Baghdad, the empire's order was held. Law courts judged with equity, mosques filled at dawn, and children learned that their sultan was the caliph of all believers. The illusion of eternity survived because it was beautiful, and sometimes, beauty is enough to delay decay. Sultans came and went like seasons. Some, like Ahmed III, sought solace in art, commissioning tulip gardens that mirrored paradise. His reign became known as the Tulip Era, brief, fragrant, fragile. Poetry bloomed alongside pleasure, diplomacy smiled where swords once flashed. But flowers, like empires, cannot live forever in bloom. The gardens burned when soldiers, unpaid and insulted, turned their anger on the palace. The 18th century arrived carrying Europe's new music, not the march of armies, but the hum of industry. Machines spun cloth faster than caravans could carry it, science replaced superstition, revolutions whispered new definitions of freedom. The Ottomans watched, proud and uncertain, their old systems too ornate to bend easily. Wars returned, against Russia, against Austria, against the tides of modernization that no fortress could resist. The empire began to lose pieces of itself, provinces peeling away like bark from an aging tree. Yet Istanbul remained magnificent, its skyline a hymn of domes and minarets, its heart still beating beneath the weight of history. By the dawn of the 19th century, the empire stood not as a conqueror but as a survivor. Diplomats replaced generals, treaties replaced triumphs. The world was changing faster than faith or custom could follow. And still the call to prayer rose 5 times a day, as if to insist that rhythm was its own kind of resistance. The 19th century dawned over Istanbul with a strange mixture of pride and anxiety. The city still glittered, its domes gilded by sunrise, its bazaars humming with spice and silver, but behind the perfume of trade lingered the metallic scent of fear. The empire was vast in memory, thin in muscle. Europe, once awed, now circled like a creditor at the door of an old palace. Sultans looked east and west and saw different futures. Mahmud, too, chose motion over nostalgia. He trimmed the empire's beard with a steady hand, dissolving the ancient Janissary core when it became too dangerous to command. The streets of Istanbul shook with cannon fire as the old order burned. The Sultan watched from his window, knowing that every shot struck at both rebellion and tradition. From the ashes rose a new army, drilled, uniformed, and painfully modern. Western advisors arrived carrying maps, textbooks, and quiet arrogance. Roads, telegraphs, and uniforms followed them. Bureaucrats in pressed coats replaced hereditary governors, schools opened to teach engineering and science beside Quranic verse. These changes were named the Tanzimat, reorganization, but to many they felt like translation, the empire slowly rewriting itself in another alphabet of progress. In the provinces, loyalty bent under pressure. Egypt, once a jewel of the Nile, slipped from direct control under Muhammad Ali, who built his own armies and industries and eyed Istanbul itself. Greece, long restless under Ottoman rule, rebelled and won independence, its poets turning rebellion into prophecy. The Balkans began to stir, each valley echoing with a new flag and an old grievance. Within the capital, reform bred resistance. Conservatives whispered that the sultans had traded God's favor for Europe's flattery, liberals argued that reform did not go far enough. The empire became a debate conducted in stone and blood. Abdulmesid I issued the Hat-i-Sharif, promising equality of law to Muslims and Christians alike, hoping fairness might bind what fear could not. For a moment, it seemed to work. But revolutions do not end, they ripple. new taxes angered peasants, foreign loans bound the treasury to European banks, and railways, those iron veins of the new age, carried both commerce and corruption. When the Crimean War came, the empire fought beside Britain and France against Russia, defending its land but spending its soul. The cannons thundered, the soldiers bled, and diplomats wrote treaties that left the Ottomans grateful and indebted at once. By the reign of Abdul Hamid II, the empire had grown wary of advice that arrived wrapped in treaties. He ruled with suspicion and brilliance, stringing telegraph wires across continents while censoring every newspaper that used them. He built schools and prisons with equal enthusiasm, dreaming of unity through surveillance. To his followers he was the Red Sultan, savior of Islam; to his critics, the jailer of progress. Meanwhile, the Balkans tore themselves free piece by piece. Serbia, Romania, and Bulgaria slipped away, each loss announced by church bells and followed by refugees trudging south with what little they could carry. The empire's map shrank like skin under cold water. Yet Istanbul remained a marvel: street lamps on the Bosporus, ferries crossing under the shadow of new bridges, languages mingling like spices in the air. In 1908, young officers rose in rebellion, demanding a constitution long promised and long denied. They called themselves the Young Turks, and their slogans carried both hope and impatience. Abdul Hamid was deposed, parliaments reconvened, the empire pretended to be young again. But reform, once more, had arrived, too late to be kind. War flared again, first in the Balkans, then everywhere. The empire lost almost all of Europe in a single bitter decade. Macedonia, Albania, and Thrace vanished from its grasp, leaving behind memories and graves. The army, though brave, fought ghosts of its own past, outdated weapons, divided command, and the fatigue of centuries. Then, in 1914, the world caught fire. The Ottomans, persuaded by Germany's promises of strength, entered the Great War. The decision sealed both their defiance and their doom. The Gallipoli campaign saw Ottoman soldiers, led by commanders like Mustafa Kemal, repel invasion with courage that astonished the world. Yet elsewhere, defeat came endlessly: the British in Mesopotamia, the Arabs in revolt, the Russians in the Caucasus. The empire bled from every border. Inside, famine and mistrust devoured what bullets missed. The Armenian tragedy unfolded in the eastern provinces, a wound that would echo through generations. In the deserts, Lawrence and the tribes rose under new banners, and the crescent that had once guarded Mecca and Medina faded into exile. When the armistice came, it felt less like peace and more like exhaustion. Allied ships filled the Bosporus, foreign flags fluttered where Ottoman standards had once ruled the wind. In the palaces, courtiers whispered of partition. The empire, born on horseback, was now divided by pens. But history rarely ends where it should. From the ruins rose a commander with clear eyes and a soldier's patience, Mustafa Kemal of Salonika. He refused surrender, rallying scattered troops into a vision of sovereignty that no empire could share. The War of Independence burned the last pages of Ottoman rule and began the first pages of modern Turkey. In 1922, the Sultanate was abolished. The last Sultan, Mehmed VI, left Istanbul aboard a British ship, the domes of his ancestors receding in the mist. Behind him, a republic prepared to breathe for the first time. The empire that had lasted 600 years ended not with a roar, but with a long exhale over the waters of the Bosporus. And yet, the stones of Istanbul still whisper their story. In the courtyards of Topkapı, the tiles still shimmer blue as faith. In Sarajevo, Cairo, Damascus, and Thessaloniki, fragments of Ottoman arches still catch the sunlight at the same angle they once did. The empire is gone, but its shadow is gentle and vast, cast across continents like a memory too proud to fade. For the Ottomans were never merely conquerors. They were translators of worlds, the bridge between desert and forest, mosque and cathedral, east and west. Their empire, at its heart, was a dream of order amid chaos, of unity in diversity, of time suspended beneath the call to prayer. And when night falls over the Bosporus, that dream still glows faintly in the water's reflection, a crescent moon trembling where the empire once stood, and history still breathes. The entire history of China's dynasties. Before there were emperors, there were rivers. The Yellow River coiled through the plains like a sleeping dragon, its breath misting the dawn. Along its banks, people built homes from mud and reeds, their fields trembling with millet and early rice. They learned to shape bronze and jade, to weave meaning into tools, and to measure the sky by the rhythm of the stars. They watched floods destroy their villages, then rebuild them, certain that every disaster was only a god's test of patience. From these waters, legends walked into history. There was U the Great, the man who tamed the floods not with prayer but with labor. He dug canals through the stubborn earth until the river learned its course. The people crowned him, and so began the first dynasty, the Xia. It was said he ruled with virtue, that he divided the land into provinces, and that his son inherited the throne. But even in myth, perfection is brief. The Xia ruled for centuries, their kings descendants of Yu's endurance. But in time, virtue thinned like old bronze. The last king, Jie, built palaces of jade and gold, drowning the empire in indulgence. He forgot the river's lesson, that power, like water, must flow or stagnate. When rebellion rose from the east, led by Tang of the Shang, the people did not resist. They had grown weary of thunder with no rain. Tang's victory began the Shang dynasty, a realm of bronze and bone, of oracles and ancestors. Their priests cracked tortoise shells over fire and read the cracks like voices of the gods. Their kings built cities of timber and earth, where drums echoed in bronze halls and soldiers marched in armor etched with beasts. They ruled through ritual as much as through fear, believing that harmony on earth was only a reflection of harmony in heaven. Generations passed, each king offering wine and sacrifice to the spirits who had once been men. The Shang people mastered metallurgy, carving dragons into every weapon and vessel. Their chariots thundered across the plains, their banners fluttered over the fields of millet, and their scribes carved words into bone, the first written dreams of China. But beneath the splendor, the same shadows gathered. The later Shang kings grew cruel, building lakes of wine and forests of meat. The final king, Zhou, was said to have burned men alive for amusement, his laughter carrying farther than his armies. In the western hills, a noble named Ji Fa watched in disgust. When the time came, he raised his banners and called his clan to arms. Heaven, he said, had withdrawn its mandate from the Shang. At the Battle of Mujie, the Zhou warriors faced the Shang host beneath a red sky. Many Shang soldiers, disgusted with their king, turned their spears and joined the rebellion. The Shang fell not by might, but by conscience. Zhou entered their capital, bowed before the ancestral altars, and declared that heaven grants power only to the just, and takes it away when corruption reigns. It was a philosophy that would guide China for 3,000 years. The Zhou dynasty began with humility and purpose. They ruled by the mandate of heaven, believing the cosmos itself had chosen them. Kings governed not as gods but as stewards, responsible for the balance between earth and sky. They gave land to vassals, who pledged loyalty in return. Villages became fiefs, fiefs became states, and for a time, order flourished. Under the early Zhou, the plough deepened, the calendar sharpened, and bronze turned from tool to art. Families grew, rituals multiplied, and the written word matured into poetry. The Book of Songs collected the voices of farmers, lovers, and kings, a chorus of humanity that outlasted every dynasty that followed. But time, that quiet enemy, never sleeps. As generations passed, the Zhou kings ruled from farther away, their grip loosened by distance and complacency. The lords of the feudal states grew powerful, their loyalty fading into ambition. The king's decrees, once divine, became suggestions. The center no longer held. The spring and autumn period began with a sigh and ended in clamor. Princes fought their brothers, ministers murdered their kings, and alliances changed like the wind. The great states, Qi, Chu, Jin, Qin, grew fat on war, feeding on the smaller kingdoms like wolves. Confucius walked through this world of chaos, preaching virtue, harmony, and duty. Few listened while alive, but centuries later his words would become a spine stronger than any army. As the warring states era dawned, China became a chessboard of ambition. Iron replaced bronze, fortresses rose like mountains, and thinkers debated the nature of power. Some preached law, others kindness, some sought to rule through fear, others through example. Among them, in the western hills, the state of Qin watched in silence, sharpening its swords and its patience. The Zhou king still sat on his throne, but his court was a ghost. The true world was in the fields where generals marched and in the forges where swords were born. War had become the empire's heartbeat, and in its rhythm, destiny stirred again. For soon, from the smoke of 1,000 battles, a man would rise who believed he could end chaos forever, by uniting everything under a single name. Out of the western hills came Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, a man who dreamed of silence after centuries of shouting. He was born in war and learned early that mercy is a currency enemies never repay. Through cunning ministers and tireless armies he devoured the rival kingdoms one by one until, in 221 BCE, the banners of Qin fluttered from the Yellow Sea to the deserts beyond the west. The 7 states became one, and the idea of China finally had a single heartbeat. He standardized everything, coins, weights, scripts, and even the width of wagon axles, so roads could align across the land. Walls that once divided states were bound together into a single serpent of stone, the Great Wall, stretching over mountains like a scar of vigilance. He burned books that questioned his rule and buried scholars who argued too loudly. In return he offered roads, canals, and the promise that peace would outlive him. But peace built on fear grows brittle. When the emperor died, his mausoleum was guarded by an army of clay men frozen in eternal obedience. His heirs quarreled, and the Qin collapsed within years, its monument to order cracked by the very rigidity that birthed it. Out of rebellion rose new banners, red instead of black, carried by farmers who wanted less perfection and more breath. Lu Bang, a man once too humble for history to notice, became Gaozu of the Han. Under him the empire softened without breaking, laws loosened, taxes eased, scholars returned to court. The Han learned to balance the sword and the brush, conquest and culture. In their hands, China expanded west along what would one day be called the Silk Road, its caravans threading through deserts toward Persia and Rome, carrying silk, paper, and rumor. In the capital of Chang'an, poets, astronomers, and artisans crowded beneath red-tiled roofs. The emperor's seal shone beside tablets of bamboo filled with records of governance and stars. Paper replaced silk as the medium of memory, and history began to move faster. Diplomats rode out to foreign kings, bearing gifts and maps, generals returned with new lands and captive songs. But no dynasty rides the dragon forever. Court factions sharpened smiles into knives, eunuchs traded whispers for power, and the great family of empire turned against itself. Peasant uprisings lit the provinces, the yellow turbans raised their banners of faith and hunger. The Han fractured like old pottery, its shards taken by warlords who claimed to mend it. 3 kingdoms rose from the ruins, Wei, Chu, and Wu, each convinced it was the rightful heir of heaven's mandate. Their stories would become legend, clever strategists summoning winds, loyal generals dying beneath cherry blossoms, brotherhood sworn under peach trees. For a century, China breathed through 3 lungs until exhaustion made unity possible again. The Jin dynasty reunified the land but inherited only weariness. Nomadic riders pressed from the north, provinces broke like thin ice. The capital fell, and with it the empire's old dignity. Northern plains filled with foreign kingdoms, while southern hills nurtured exiled courts and new accents. Still, scholars copied books, farmers plowed fields, and the thread of civilization refused to snap. Out of the north, after centuries of mingling bloodlines and beliefs, another unifier emerged, the Sui. They built the Grand Canal, a ribbon of water binding north to south, grain to hunger, emperor to people. But they dug too deep, taxed too hard, dreamed too quickly. Within a generation the Sui were gone, leaving behind only the canal and the lesson that endurance is gentler than ambition. Then came the Tang, and with them, light. Their emperors ruled a world both fierce and curious, where horses thundered across Central Asia and monks carried sutras to India. Chang'an bloomed into the largest city on earth, a galaxy of markets and lanterns where Persians, Arabs, Turks, and Koreans traded goods and stories. Poetry became the empire's second language, Li Bai and Du Fu turned wine and sorrow into immortality. The Tang armies reached the Pamirs, their diplomats conversed with Byzantines. Women rode and governed, silk glittered on soldiers' armor, and music from foreign lands echoed through jade-walled halls. It was a golden age that mistook its own brilliance for permanence. When rebellion came, the Unlushan uprising, it tore the empire's heart. Millions perished, cities burned. The emperor fled through snow to safety brought by tears. Though Tang recovered, the wound never fully closed. Eunuchs gained power, provinces gained autonomy, and the once radiant capital grew quieter. When the dynasty finally ended, poets compared its fall to a setting sun reflected in the river, beautiful, distant, and gone. The song followed, born of intellect rather than conquest. They rebuilt with scholars instead of generals, their emperors favoring brushstrokes over blood. Printing blossomed, gunpowder hissed, compasses pointed the way to seas still unnamed. Cities rose with paved streets and paper money, merchants as proud as ministers. Knowledge itself became a kind of empire. Yet wisdom cannot always guard the gate. To the north, steppe kingdoms gathered strength, Khitan, Jurchen, Mongol. The Great Wall, once mighty, had forgotten how to listen to hooves. The song bought peace with tribute, but tribute invites hunger. Eventually, the riders would come. For now, the empire glittered, lanterns mirrored in canals, bells tolling in porcelain towers. Painters captured mountains shrouded in mist, philosophers argued about virtue and emptiness. China had become a civilization of reflection, its greatness turned inward. But in the distance, across the plains of Mongolia, thunder was already forming, the kind of thunder that changes maps. The thunder came from the north. Across the wide grasslands where the sky touches forever, horsemen gathered under a single standard. Their leader was Genghis Khan, a man born in hardship and crowned by will. His riders moved like weather, swift, merciless, and precise. They carried no walls, only the horizon, and when they looked south they saw a rich land divided by fear and comfort. The Mongols descended upon the Song frontier like a storm that refused to end. Fortresses burned, cities surrendered, emperors begged the heavens for deliverance. In 1271, Genghis's grandson Kublai Khan declared the Yuan dynasty, and by 1279, all of China bowed beneath the saddle. The dragon had been bridled by the horse. Kublai built his capital at Dadu, Beijing, its avenues wide, its walls straight, its order foreign yet fascinating. The Mongols ruled from a distance, letting the Chinese administer themselves while keeping the empire's heart on the steppes. They invited Persian astronomers, Arab doctors, Venetian travelers. Marco Polo marveled at their splendor, calling China the most magnificent land he had ever seen. But the Yuan dynasty was built on tension, not trust. The Mongols ruled as conquerors, not kin. Famines came, floods followed. Rebellions simmered among peasants and monks who whispered prophecies in red banners. Out of the chaos rose Zhu Yunjiang, a beggar monk turned general who fought with desperation born of hunger. When his armies took Nanjing, the dynasty's fate was sealed. In 1368, Zhu proclaimed the Ming dynasty, bright, pure, named for light. He ruled as the Hong'er emperor, harsh but just, rebuilding canals, farms, and laws. Under him, China rediscovered its rhythm, the scholar in his robe, the farmer in his field, the emperor beneath heaven's mandate. Paper money flowed again, the civil service revived, and the Great Wall was rebuilt with brick and defiance. The Ming emperors brought stability, but also ambition. Yongle, the third emperor, moved the capital north to Beijing and built the Forbidden City, its crimson gates aligned with the stars. Within those walls, the emperor became both man and myth, unseen yet omnipresent, his word carried by eunuchs across an empire that stretched from jungle to desert. Beyond the sea, the Ming looked outward. Admiral Zheng He, towering and loyal, commanded fleets of treasure ships that dwarfed the world's imagination. They sailed to India, Arabia, and Africa, their hulls heavy with silk and porcelain, their sails billowing with imperial pride. The world saw China's grandeur, but when the ships returned, the emperor turned inward again. The seas were closed, and the empire folded its wings. Isolation brought peace, and blindness. While Europe discovered continents, China perfected bureaucracy. Scholars debated poetry while pirates tested the coast. The court grew suspicious of merchants and innovation, tradition became armor, and armor became a cage. In the late Ming years, silver flooded the markets from Spanish ships across the Pacific. Wealth glittered but hollowed the core. Eunuchs controlled the court, taxes broke the farmers, and corruption poisoned the river of government. When famine came, rebellion followed. In 1644, peasant armies stormed Beijing, and the last Ming emperor hanged himself beneath a lonely tree. The dynasty of light had extinguished itself. But the story did not end, it never did. From the northern plains came new riders, this time not Mongols but Manchus, disciplined and patient. They entered the fallen capital, claiming to avenge the Ming and then deciding to rule in their stead. Thus began the Qing dynasty, the final empire of emperors. The Qing rulers were foreigners by blood but students of China by design. They wore Manchu braids yet governed with Confucian grace. Kangxi, the wise, ruled for 60 years, riding tirelessly through his dominion to know it by sight, not rumor. He brought peace to frontiers, codified laws, and opened dialogues with the West. His grandson Qianlong extended the empire to its greatest borders, from Tibet to Xinjiang, from the Amur to the South China Sea. The Qing Golden Age glimmered with art and abundance. Scrolls painted mountains so vast they seemed to breathe, jade and porcelain found perfection, libraries overflowed with knowledge. But beneath the surface, decay whispered. Population boomed, officials ossified, and the empire's arrogance swelled until it confused immensity with immortality. When foreign traders arrived bearing opium instead of tribute, China refused to bow. The British demanded trade, the Qing demanded dignity. The Opium Wars shattered both illusions. Cannons from iron ships thundered along the coast, and for the first time in 2 millennia, China's ancient heart trembled before an enemy it could not see coming. Unequal treaties followed, ports forced open, silver drained, pride wounded. Rebellions erupted in waves, the Taiping, promising heaven on earth, the Boxer, raging against the foreign shadow. Each crushed uprising left deeper scars. The dynasty staggered forward, its dragon robes heavy with history and grief. By the dawn of the 20th century, the world had changed beyond recognition. Steamships, telegraphs, and rifles erased the rhythms of an older age. The Dowager Empress Cixi ruled from behind silk screens, her hand both steady and late. Reformers begged for change, conservatives clung to ritual. And in 1911, after more than 2,000 years of imperial rule, the mandate of heaven flickered out. The last emperor, Pui, a child in yellow silk, surrendered his throne to silence. The republic that followed stumbled like a newborn, but the empire's memory lingered. It still lives, in the shape of the cities, in the characters of the language, in the patience of the people. China did not vanish when its dynasties fell, it transformed, as it always had. Through every rise and fall, from Yu's flood to the Forbidden City, one truth endured, that power is borrowed from heaven, but the spirit of a people is born from the earth. Dynasties rise, emperors fade, walls crumble, but the river keeps its course. And somewhere along its banks, a child still looks at the water and wonders what stories it remembers. The entire history of the British Empire. Mist gathered over a small island where winds carried the memory of Romans and the promise of ships not yet built. Fishermen read the weather on the skin of the sea, and merchants counted their hopes in wool and tin. Kings feuded and mended, borders breathed in and out, and the island learned that survival meant watching the horizon as carefully as the harvest. Somewhere in the salt air a question took root: what waits beyond the line where the sky kisses water? The answer arrived with sails. Mariners crept along coasts, then dared the open. They learned to stitch latitude to luck and made maps that looked like prayers in ink. In London's narrow lanes, investors traded risk like spice, and a crown, sometimes steady, sometimes trembling, signed charters that turned adventure into policy. The sea, once a boundary, became a road. A virgin queen ruled in a dress of daylight and iron, reading her enemies as easily as she read poetry. Spain, armored in faith and gold, sent a storm of galleons north, and England answered with smaller ships and larger nerve. Cannons barked, weather took sides, and wreckage wrote its lesson across grey waves: boldness can be a nation's first navy. With danger out to sea and opportunity beyond it, privateers became merchants, merchants became partners of the crown. Timber groaned into hulls, harbors learned the names of faraway winds. In the Caribbean, sugar fields glittered with cruel profit. Across the Atlantic, settlements huddled behind palisades and promised themselves they were building not just farms but futures. Trade routes braided the ocean, and their knots were strong enough to hold lives, willing and unwilling, together. On the coast of Africa, forts rose like clenched fists above surf that swallowed names. Human beings were weighed, branded, and sold. Ledger lines marched where footprints had been erased. In England's counting houses, arithmetic muffled conscience, and wealth learned to move faster than pity. The empire's first empire was commerce, and commerce does not ask questions it cannot price. Eastward, a different charter unfolded. Clerks with steel pens and soldiers with soft boots stepped onto Indian shores beneath flags that promised partnership and delivered power. The company smiled, traded, lent, taxed and, when invited or resisted, fought. Palaces learned to set another chair at council tables, princes learned that signatures can be chains with invisible links. At home, a republic rose and fell across the channel, And Britain tested its own future against the tremors of revolution by sharpening law, credit, and navy. Ministers mapped the globe as if it were an account to be balanced, admirals learned to fold distance into discipline. When the great continental wars came, the island fought on land reluctantly and at sea with genius. Every convoy that arrived was a heartbeat, every blockade that held, a breath refused to tyranny. Traders and soldiers together discovered the arithmetic of empire: protect a port, claim a river, tax a hinterland, hire a bureaucracy, require an army to protect it. The apparatus grew like coral, incrementally, beautifully, dangerously, until an archipelago of decisions hardened into an archipelago of dominion. Across the forests and fields of North America, colonists learned to call themselves something larger than dutiful subjects. They prayed in their own accents, printed their own arguments, and counted their own grievances. Tea darkened harbors, muskets answered proclamations. The island across the sea discovered that distance multiplies the price of loyalty, and when the reckoning came, redcoats marched away from a new flag that stitched 13 arguments into a single vow. Defeat did not end the habit of reach, it changed its direction. In India, accounts replaced apologies, and battles replaced balance sheets. On the Nile and the Cape, explorers took the measure of continents with instruments, diaries, and hunger. In Australia, a penal colony became a seabed. In the Pacific, charts drew names onto water where only stars had been travelers' guides. The sun, it seemed, had begun its long habit of finding British colours when it rose. Back in the mills and foundries, soot wrote a second history, iron was heated into rails, steam learned to pull weight against the stubbornness of geography. The island became an engine and then exported the habit. Ships of iron, faster, hungrier, carried textiles, tools, treaties. Missionaries carried Bibles, surveyors carried tripods, administrators carried forms. Where the flag did not fly, the invoice did. India boiled and simmered and finally burned. Company uniforms gave way to the crowns, and Delhi learned to host ceremonies where the emperor was absent but present, a shadow made of uniforms, medals, and carefully translated proclamations. Railways stitched provinces to ports, famine and reform quarreled in the same years, the law codified everything it could catch. Beneath the regalia, a new desire stirred: how long must guests remain guests in their own houses? On the African map, straight lines appeared where rivers did not. Conferences in European rooms carved futures for people not invited, and treaties were signed between men who would never meet those who must obey them. Resistance rose, cunning and brave, Maxim guns answered, efficient and cold. Diamonds and gold rushed to London, names local and ancient were relabeled with imperial grammar. Islands and peninsulas, gulfs and straits, strategic nouns, entered the language of necessity. Malta was a hinge, Gibraltar a knuckle, Suez a vein. The empire learned that geography was a lever and that levers require hands everywhere. Governors' pens tried to keep time in many clocks at once, the Royal Navy's whistles did their best to be louder than distance. At home, the franchise widened by argument rather than mercy. Factories demanded lungs and hours, cities learned how to carry millions in brick and cholera and reform. Newspapers made an audience of the empire itself, printing dispatches that turned faraway triumphs into breakfast and faraway tragedies into footnotes. Children learned two kinds of maps at school, the physical one and the one tinted rose. Rivals grew. One empire old and recovering, another young and certain, one born from revolution, another forged by industry with a Kaiser's impatience. Alliances were the new ships, seaworthy until they weren't. When the powder exploded in a corner of Europe, the fire ran along all the lines the British had drawn to connect their world. Troops marched under many flags to the same trenches, dominions answered with blood heavier than gratitude. Victory felt like survival, not triumph. Columns of names filled stone memorials, debts filled ledgers, empires old and new inhaled and found less air than before. In Ireland, the question of home, whose, and under what terms, refused to be answered by tradition and finally wrote its own reply. In India, a man in a homespun shawl taught the world how to turn salt and silence into a weapon, and a subcontinent discovered that empire is allergic to patience practiced by millions. Storm clouds gathered over continents that had learned to read British weather as policy. The First Great War arrived like a tide none could command. Men from farms outside Manchester stood shoulder to shoulder with men from Punjab, the Cape, and Otago, accents braided by mud and fear. In Flanders the ground swallowed certainty, at Gallipoli cliffs learned all the names of courage. Ships convoyed wheat and hope, factories hammered night into munitions. Victory, when it came, felt like a man rising from surgery, grateful but changed. The bill was more than numbers. Crosses and crescents stood in new fields, widows learned to fold photographs like prayer books. In Dublin, an Easter rebellion spoke in gunfire and poetry, the island's argument, older than treaties, returned with an adult voice. Across the Middle East, lines were inked upon maps by tired hands, creating mandates that walked like empires wearing borrowed shoes. The League promised a gentler world while concessions and pipelines rehearsed an older script. In the 1920s, London danced on a floor of credit while coal miners measured daylight with lamps. The empire still looked enormous on schoolroom maps, but weight had shifted from muscle to mortgage. In India, Congress halls filled with speeches and spinning wheels. In the streets, the quiet insistence of non-violence unsettled batons and conscience alike. Newspapers carried photographs of men who refused to move and policemen who did not know what to do with stillness. The second firestorm arrived with fewer illusions and faster engines. Again the dominions answered, again the seas became arteries. In North Africa, desert rats learned to read dunes like waves. Over Britain, searchlights stitched a net into the night and caught bombers only in light. On D-Day, the empire's pieces moved together with strangers under one plan. In Burma, jungle swallowed fatigue and unlocked stubbornness. When the war ended, there was relief enough to fill a cathedral, and exhaustion enough to empty it. Peace asked questions the war had postponed. India's midnight came, and a subcontinent stepped into two newborn rooms at once, India and Pakistan, while the corridor between them filled with trains and grief. Flags rose, but the wind carried ashes from village to village, even victory looked away. In Palestine, a mandate dissolved into missiles and mourning, and a new country was wrapped in old loss. The map learned to cry in several languages. Africa woke like a continent stretching after a long, uneasy sleep. In the Gold Coast, lawyers turned into statesmen. In Kenya, oaths pledged under trees met the clipped grammar of counterinsurgency. In Rhodesia and Nyasaland, federations proved that paper can hold borders but not consent. Suez, a small cut in the earth, reopened a wound in pride. Ships stopped, troops landed, and the world shrugged the old empire off its shoulders in a week. Britain blinked into a mirror and saw influence where it had expected obedience. The 1960s moved quickly, like a film sped up. Nigeria, Tanganyika, Uganda, Zambia, Malawi, names that had been footnotes on dispatches became headlines and hymns. New parliaments learned protocols and improvisation at the same speed. New flags learned how to be saluted, new armies learned how not to be old ones. Some transitions were tender, others torn. In Cyprus and Aden, the farewell was noisy. In the Caribbean it was musical, calypso and cricket and a handshake that promised friendship more than supervision. At home, the empire returned by invitation and necessity. The Windrush brought craftsmen, nurses, and bus drivers from islands that already knew Britain by weather forecasts and war stories. A grey city learned new colours in its markets, a tired city learned new tempos on its streets. Not everyone was ready, not everyone was kind. But children who grew up between accents taught the island the difference between possession and belonging. Elsewhere the empire lingered like a habit in small harbours and windswept rocks. The Falklands, near enough to Antarctica to let penguins set the tone, flared into defiance and return when distance misunderstood resolve. Hong Kong, thrumming with ambition and neon, lived an arranged life between treaty and practice until a careful calendar reached its last page. The handover was a ceremony of umbrellas and instruments, a city stepping between guardians with a briefcase full of promises. Commonwealth replaced command, the old club swapping swords for speeches, tariffs for trade deals, and imperial certainty for something that looked like conversation. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it remembered how to sulk. Britain learned to count power differently, in finance that flowed at the speed of electricity, in universities that gathered minds like ports gathered ships, in media that could cross borders without passports. The pound measured less than it had, the language measured more. The navy shrank to size, but its ghosts still walked the quays. Veterans told stories that smelled of cordite and salt, their grandchildren built software and asked their elders for recipes instead of orders. Museums filled with artifacts that had once been spoils and were now exhibits, each label a paragraph in a longer argument about who owns memory. Apologies were offered, resisted, refined, postponed, repeated. History is a conversation that never ends, especially when it has invoices attached. And yet, in the half-light before sleep, the island still hears the old sea. Not as a summons, but as a reminder. Influence is a tide, it arrives if invited, recedes if commanded. The BBC's vowels travel farther than gunboats, an academic paper can redraw a boundary more gently than a treaty, a football match can bind strangers more honestly than a statute. Soft power is a quieter empire, and like all quiet things, it demands better listening. The empire fell in the way most large things do, by degrees, by decisions, by disappointments, by the simple arithmetic of time. What remains are bridges, some literal, most not, over which people still walk, legal systems that speak familiar phrases in far countries, parliaments that argue with recognizable etiquette, cricket played beneath jacarandas, tea poured where coffee grows better. Sometimes those bridges are used in both directions, sometimes they are toll roads, sometimes they are closed for repairs. Night gathers, and the old maps hang on classroom walls only as art. Children trace rivers with fingers and ask less about ownership and more about consequence. The story they inherit includes bravery and theft, canals and chains, hospitals and hangings, schools and silences. To tell it properly is to hold contradictions in two hands and refuse to drop either. Morning came quietly to a smaller world. The empire had ended not with collapse but with a long series of doors closing behind departing guests. What remained was the sound of footsteps on those thresholds, soldiers turned students, governors turned consultants, colonials turned citizens of their own invention. London woke to find itself less capital of an empire than crossroads of a planet that spoke its language back to it, sometimes warmly, sometimes with argument. The island adjusted to the new arithmetic. Coal lost its throne to oil, then to code. Shipyards that once built dreadnoughts built ferries, then rusted, then reopened as museums. Economists renamed power, it now lived in currencies, patents, media, and the quiet diplomacy of markets. Heathrow replaced Portsmouth as the empire's busiest port. The world arrived by air instead of orders. Writers began to measure the distance between conquest and imagination. Naipaul, Rushdie, Walcott, Chebe, Rees, each wrote in the language that had once claimed them and turned it inside out. English ceased to belong to the island, it became a global weather system. In it, the stories of empire were retold from the other side of the horizon, and the silence around history filled with accents that refused to fade. In classrooms, teachers swapped celebration for curiosity. The old phrase "the sun never sets" reappeared only in jokes and examinations. Students traced trade routes on digital maps, saw colonies turn into commonwealths, and learned that wealth itself had become a colony of attention. Museums polished their bronzes and added new plaques, one paragraph of pride, one of apology, both incomplete. Law, that most durable export, continued to travel. In Delhi and Kingston, in Nairobi and Canberra, judges quoted precedents written by men who could never have imagined the places their words would live. Cricket endured too, a game slower than history, generous enough to hold rivalry and respect in the same over. The Commonwealth Games replaced imperial exhibitions, medals replaced medals of service. Flags still rose together, but now each had its own anthem. In the streets of London, empire came home wearing every colour it had once ruled. Brixton's markets sang in Yoruba and Punjabi, Brick Lane smelled of cardamom and fish sauce, mosques shared skylines with steeples. Some saw enrichment, others invasion, in truth it was both consequence and continuation, the empire remade in miniature, negotiating coexistence one postcode at a time. Politics wrestled with memory. Some longed for the map in red, others wanted to repaint it entirely. Debates over statues and syllabuses became family arguments in public squares. Yet amid the shouting, quieter work continued, volunteers cataloguing archives, historians digitizing forgotten petitions, descendants tracing lineage through ship manifests and census ledgers. The empire's paperwork had outlived its power, and in those papers people searched for truth. Across the Atlantic, the United States, once a rebellious colony, became both heir and critic of British global habits. In Europe, Britain joined a union to find relevance and later left it to find identity. Influence turned migratory, through finance in Hong Kong, language in Lagos, design in Mumbai, pop culture in Toronto. The Beatles reached more listeners than any admiral ever had, Harry Potter colonized childhood more gently than any governor could. In the 21st century, the island faced the mirror without costume. Its power was persuasion now, the ability to tell stories the world still wanted to hear. Universities became embassies of curiosity, journalists, the new explorers, comedians, the empire's historians in disguise. Soft power meant learning to be interesting instead of feared. Occasionally, the old drums sounded, a royal tour, a coronation, a military parade that still knew how to hold its breath on command. But the meaning had shifted. The crown had become theatre, and theatre, unlike empire, survives by consent. The Commonwealth kept meeting, not because it must, but because habit sometimes resembles affection. And so the empire endures not as dominion but as echo. In a courtroom in Singapore, a barrister still begins with "May it please the court." In a Kenyan village, children study in English to enter a world their ancestors helped build but never owned. In a Caribbean kitchen, a grandmother pours tea and calls it hers. The empire's afterlife is domestic, woven into recipes, vocabulary, cricket scores, and the timetables of airports. When night falls over the Thames, the river glows with office light instead of lanterns. Cargo ships slide by like slow memories, their flags multinational, their crews polyglot. Above the Houses of Parliament, the clock that once ruled time for half the planet still chimes, but now its echo is a courtesy, not a command. The empire's true monument is not marble or bronze. It is the English sentence, still under construction everywhere. It is the legal brief, the parliamentary debate, the poem that rhymes London with Lahore. What began as possession became conversation, and conversation, though sometimes painful, is harder to end. And if, before sleep, one listens to the wind along the coast of Cornwall, it carries the same whisper it did before empire began, the sea asking what comes next. The island answers, as it always has, by sending out words instead of ships. Its greatest export now is curiosity. Its dominion, if it has one, is imagination.